Hi there once again, and welcome to another Expresso mechanic tutorial. And this is episode 20 in the series Expresso Nuts and Bolts. A few years ago when I started this particular series, the first episode was concentrated around the spline within a range mapper node and how we could take control of that using the operator. Well, this is effectively a companion tutorial because it's a practical example of what we can actually achieve when we go about doing that. Now, I was recently asked by Scott Williams, who's the Triple Tiger, and he was the inspiration for my last tutorial actually, but he asked me if we could do something like we're doing here on the screen. Basically, if we click the Expresso here, we've got 3 frames and 3 percentages. So what we're saying here is between frames 1 and 30, we want to travel from 10% of the spline to 40% of the spline. So we're dealing with the actual length of the spline. If you notice, the cube jumps to here, and that's 10% of the spline that it's jumped to. And then we go to 40%, and then it speeds up between 40% and 100% because we're doing that between frames 30 and 50. So at first we're traveling over effectively 29 frames and then 20 frames. So that's why there's the increase in speed, and also because, of course, 10% to 40% is a lot less than 40% to 100%. It's double the amount, 40% to 100%. So that's what we're doing. We're taking control of the actual align to spline tag, and that's how we're doing this. We're using it to control this position value. That's what we're going to be about in this tutorial. So without further ado, let's see if we can make this happen. We'll start by bringing in a circle, and we'll put it in the XZ plane. I'm not going to change its radius because there's really no need to do so. The only thing that we could possibly do to make it a little bit more circular is add some points. We'll make it 100. But other than that, not touching it. I'll bring in a cube and we'll make it 30 by 30 by 30. And we'll also fillet it just to make it look reasonably nice, and we'll change our display to garage shading lines, and also we'll change it to isopalms. Might as well give the cube a colour, and we'll change it to, I think, a green. That'll do nicely. Okay, we've got that far. We can give the cube an align to spline tag and drop the circle into the spline path, and we're ready to go. I'll bring in a null, give it an Expresso tag. We've got the editor open. Oops, I've got my new operating system from the Mac. Don't like it when it does that. It's useful in some ways, but in others it's a bit of a pain in the bum. But anyway, we'll put that up there. We've got our window open and we're ready to start work. Now, it's fair to say that Scott had created what can only be described as quite an extensive expression in order to make all of this happen. Well, the good news is we don't have to be quite so sophisticated. We can actually do this in a much simpler way. What we need to do first, though, is create some user data on our null. So we'll add user data. We'll start with frame 1. And this will need to be an integer, and we'll give it an integer slider. Steps of 1 is fine, and we can go from 0 to 100. I'm perfectly fine with that. We'll limit ourselves to 0 to 100, and that's fine. The default value, we can leave that at 0. I want to copy this, and it's going to cause me a few problems, I think, because it's ridiculous. It shouldn't do that. All right, let's do a second one then. We'll call, in fact, what we'll do, I'll have to create another data. Let's add another data, call this frame 2. And I've just got to set it up the same way. So integer, and just do that. And we should be fine. Let's just give it an integer slider interface. And that should be okay. Let's see if it'll let me copy this one. No, it still won't. Ridiculous. So I've got to say, okay, go back into my user data, manage user data. And now, if I can, no, it's still, oh, yes, it did let me. It was still insisting that it wasn't going to at first, though. And that's all I need to do. So I've got my 3 frames. What I also want to do is add a group. I'll pull the group away from our user data here, and I want to drop all of these into that group and rename it controls. Okay, fantastic. So we've got that. The next thing to do, add some more user data. This one will be a separator. So we'll come down to separator, separator line, and we'll take away its name because we don't want anything there. We can then continue adding data. Now these will be our percentage values. So we can say %1. This will be a float. We'll leave it as a float, and it will be a float slider for the interface. The unit will be %, and it will be 1% steps. We may as well do 1%. You can go lower if you wish to, but 1% is fine. Again, 0 to 100%, and we will limit it because we don't want to go above, and that's fine. That's good. Right, let's see what we do here. And here, it allows me to actually copy, which is crazy, isn't it? But there you go. It does allow me to do it. So we can just say %2, command drag again to copy, and %3. Done. Okay, and that completes our user data. So we'll hit the OK button, and we've got controls here, and we've got it set up. Fantastic. So we've got that far. The next thing we need to do is start with our Expresso. And our first node will be a time node, so we'll bring one of those in. I'll delete the time port, add a frame port, and that's good. Moving on from here, we need a range mapper. We'll bring that in. So we'll calculate range mapper, and we've got one of those. Connect our frame to the input. And for this range mapper, we want frame values between 0 and 100. And the output range needs to be 0 to 1 because we're going to be using it to control the align to spline. And we'll bring that in now. Now the align to spline, we just want tag properties, position. Okay. And then we can just hook those up together. And that's all sorted out. So if we play the timeline, we now move our cube. The other thing I'm going to do is just select my align to spline and just check the tangential so that we make the cube move in a much more pleasant way. Okay, we've got that far. Now within the spline, I should say within the range mapper, we've got the spline. And we've got nothing in there at the moment. We do have use spline checked, and we are going to. So we need to just put 3 spline points in. And for the moment, it doesn't really matter where they go. But one thing that does matter, if we just twirl this open, is that we need the interpolation to be cubic for all the points. So I'm going to shift select all of them and then change them to cubic. And we'll just leave it like this. As I say, we're going to be taking complete control of this, so we don't need to worry about the points at the moment. Next thing to do is bring in our null. In fact, we'll just rename that Expresso, and I'll drag that in. So I've got that into my window, and I can come down to controls as we've got here, and we can bring these in. So we want frame 1, frame 2, frame 3, and then all of our percentage values. And that gives us everything that we need, and we can just command double click to make that larger so that we can see everything. Let's just reselect the Expresso, and in the editor we'll just bring in a result node. We need to click that again, connect it up to there. Oh, it keeps doing it, doesn't it? I'll tell you what, let's do that and lock it. Okay, that's great. That will prevent us from having that particular problem again. And we can then check to see what's coming out. Now, the frames, we know they're going to be integer values, and we're going to get exactly what we think. But the thing that we find with the percentages, if we just connect %1 there, if we move this, we're actually getting a value between 0 and 1. And that's great because that's what we need. We actually need all of these to be producing values between 0 and 1. Right, there's no need for us to do anything with these but there is a need for us to do something with the first three. And what we need to do is bring in 3 range mappers. I'm not going to use the first one because we've got the spline there. I mean, you can, and you can take the spline away, but for what it is, let's just bring in another range mapper. And then we can just simply create 2 copies by command dragging. We can move this down a little bit, open the window a little bit more. Okay, great. So what we need to do then is set these range mappers up with their input ranges. Now let's have a look. If we just unlock that and we just reselect those again. Okay, so we know that the input lower is going to be 0 and the input upper will be 100. So let's make that 100. And then the output values are perfectly good. So we want to output between 0 and 1. And on this occasion, we don't need the spline, so we're just going to leave that alone. We can uncheck that actually because we just don't need it. Connect up frame 1, 2, and 3 to our range mappers. And then we're ready for the next step. Now, the next step is the all-important one. We need to select this range mapper because that's the one with the spline. And then we need to drag in its operator. Bring this in. And now we've got access to our spline. Because if we go to our inputs here, come down to parameter, spline, we can see that we've got the X and Y positions for point 1, XY for point 2, and the same for point 3. And they're the values that we need to work with. So we'll select that one. And we'll do all the X's first. It's easier that way, I think. So let's go down here and say X for point 2, X for point 3, and then we just need to do the same with the Y values. Just get that in. And we've got them all. We can open that up so that we can see them. And there we have it. Now, if we select this again, the way this is going to work, our frame values represent time. Time is the x-axis, okay? And the y-axis is the percentage values. So that's how this is going to be working. First thing that we can do then is start to connect all of this stuff up. Let's put our values here, and we can see that things are already starting to happen. So now at the moment we're all at 0 along our time, along our x-axis, and if we connect everything from here, we'll find that our points are now all in this corner because they're all at 0. If we select the Expresso, everything is at 0. What we'll do is select this. If we put this in a separate window so that we can see what's going on, just place it here, and then we'll select the Expresso. It's going to move things around so that we can see everything. It's that we want to see, so that's fine. So we've got the Expresso and we've got our controls. So as I say, everything is zeroed at the moment, but if we start playing around with these, we can see what's going to happen. I think we'll leave frame 1 and percent 1 at 0. If we just set this over here to say 30, we can see that this has moved, and we'll set percent 2 to say 50. So in other words, over our first second of animation, 0 to 30, we're going to move to halfway around our align to spline. And then what we can do if we wish is go from frame 30 to say frame 100. We may as well do frame 100, and we'll go to 100%. And we can see that we've created basically an ease out, easing curve here, and another one here. They're very subtle, but they are ease out, easing curves. And if we just run the timeline, we can see that we're getting the result that we want. Quite quick at first, and then it slows down. So that's fine, that's working. It's doing exactly what it should do. Now, if we want to, we can do, oh dear, that is so annoying. We can do cleverer stuff with this. Now at the moment, you've got to remember, we've only got 3 frame values and 3% values, but imagine if you had 10. You could make this do some incredible stuff. For example, I mean, if we've got we're going from frame 0 to frame 30 and then to frame 100. But we said we'd go from 0 to 50 and then to 100. But if we went back to 0, we can create an oscillation in this then. So we can go to there and then we go back. And we can see that it's fast and then slow. And that's working quite nicely. We've only got 90 frames and there's a bit of a glitch because of that. If we make it 100, there won't be. Let's just go back to the beginning, play again, and here we go, and it will loop. And it works really nicely. It eases out, it eases in, and it loops perfectly. So there's plenty that you can do. And similarly, if we want to start from, let's say we'll start from frame 15, okay? And if we do that, we'll get a half a second delay before we move. And it speeds things up because of it, of course. So you can use things like this and you can create delay effects and all kinds of different things with this. There's a number of different things that you can do. So it's a versatile setup, but it becomes more versatile if you add more points to your spline, more frame values and more percentage values. But it's quite a fun thing to do, and you could do some quite interesting motion type graphic-y things with it, which would be quite fun to do, I think. So yes, you know, there's a number of different things that you can play around with here, have a go, see what you can do. And as we said before, you can start with your percentage. If you want to start 10% along the spline, you can do that. So we can see that we've got delay here, plus we've also moved so that we start over here somewhere. And we could also go back to just 10% of our spline if we wish to, and we can see that that's already moved. So now we're starting from a different point. We've got a delay, but we go back there and we still loop. So this was actually a very good idea for a tutorial from Scott, really. I'd never actually played around with any of this with the Alain to spline, and I perhaps wouldn't have thought to do so, but so thanks, Scott, for giving me the idea to do this tutorial, because it's been a very worthwhile one to do. But you can see that's the only expression that we need. And if we wanted to, I mean, there's something else that we can do. If we wanted to get, say, another range mapper, let's just copy this one. We can plumb the output of this into here. So we've got a range between 0 and 1 coming into there. Let's just make that 1. And if we say a value between, I don't know, let's go 30 to, say, 60, we can drag the cube in and we can work with its size. If we say object properties size and just go for size generally, I mean, you can do X, Y, and Z if you wish individually, but let's just plumb that in there. And if we run that now, the cube actually grows and shrinks. So that's something else that you can have a play around with. You can use it with other parameters. But there you go. It's pretty cool, actually. That just about brings us to the end of this tutorial. So as always, I really hope you've enjoyed this one. And if you have, then please give it a like. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel, leave a comment, and of course, ring the bell. And wherever you happen to be on social media, please, as I always say, please do share this video, because all this good stuff really does help keep the channel moving in the right direction. But anyway, that just about wraps this one up. So I'll see you at some point in the future on the next tutorial.